John. We will get to that in a future installment of this series. Now, getting back to the area of Scythia and our Sereth. The migrations of the Scythian Israelites is confirmed by the trail of burial grounds of the Scythians and their kings, which led up the Dnieper River as far as Kiev. The oldest of these artifacts are those closest to Romania, Armenia, and South Russia. Their burial sites spread as far as the Danish islands and the Jutland Peninsula. Jutland is named after the tribe of Judah, because the tribe of Judah migrated as far as Jutland. Quoting Filmer in a book about this subject, now Tacitus and Ptolemy named the region of the river Elbe and the base of the Jutland Peninsula as the places inhabited by the Angles and Saxons before they came to Britain. According to Roman terminology, this was Germany. But it is interesting to note that the British historian Nennius, in his account of the arrival of the Hengist and Horsa in Thanet, T-H-A-N-E-T, says that the messengers were sent to Scythia for reinforcements. So we know from the various historians of these ancient times that the Scythians, the Saxons, and the Germans are in fact the same people. They're simply different names for the same people in different languages. The context shows that these came in fact from North Germany, so evidently the ancient name of the genuine Scythians persisted a long time in Northern Europe. Regarding the same migrations of these people, M.I. Rostovtsev, in his Iranians and Greeks in South Russia, says this: "We cannot but recognize that in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, the Scythians endeavored to install themselves as a ruling class in the northern regions of their empire, to transform their suzerainty into a real domination, and to extend that domination as far as possible to the north. It will not be denied that this Scythian expansion, hitherto unnoticed, is an historical fact of the first importance. Indeed, it is of the first importance to us because we are those people. We are the descendants of those people. Pliny the Elder tells us in his Natural History, the name of the Scythians is everywhere changed to that of Sarmate and Germans." So we know, tracing these histories, that the Israelites became known as the Scythians, then became known as the Saxons and Anglo Saxons, and also became known as the Germans. Strabo, who wrote in the 1st century AD, says of the Sake, that is our Saxon ancestors, "Most of the Scythians, beginning from the Caspian Sea, which was to the east of the Black Sea, are called the Dahe Scythae, and those situated more towards the east, the Massagetae and Sake. The rest have the common name of Scythians, but each tribe has its own peculiar name." So Strabo, the historian, also tells us that these various tribes wandered through the Caucasus Mountain region, around the Black Sea, around the Caspian Sea, into Europe, and became known as the German people, the Anglo-Saxon people. Bede, the English historian, says, they had come from the three of his people, the English people. They had come from the 3 bravest nations of Germany, namely from the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. So we're identifying the Anglo-Saxons as the Sake, the descendants of Isaac from the Bible, and the Jutes being the tribe of Judah. The Cantiari, the inhabitants of Kent, are of Jutish, that is, Judah origin, and so are the Victuari, the tribe which inhabits the Isle of Wight. The East Saxons, the South Saxons, and the West Saxons came from the Saxons in general, from the country which is now called the country of the Old Saxons, which today is Germany. Okay? So we can trace the migrations of our people into modern Europe directly from Israel in 745 BC. Now the Celts, Cimmerians, and Gales, we're going to cover this subject as to the Israelite origin of the Celts, Cimmerians, and Gales. The Cimmerians or Celts have also been known as Celtae, Gelte, Galatae, Galatians, Goidels, Gauls, and Gales. Where did these names come from? The Cimmerians in Armenia were later joined from the southeast by westward advancing Scythians of Medo-Persia, that is, Israelites from around Samaria, taken in the second captivity. However, the Cimmerians were first established as those people who had been carried away in Israel's first Assyrian captivity, known as the Galilean captivity, from the northern and eastern regions of the northern kingdom, the lands of Galilee and Gilead. Just to the east of the Sea of Galilee we find the Golan Heights. The Hebrew word Golan means their captivity and comes from the word Gola, meaning captive or exile. And now also in Spain. In Spain, these people were called Celtiberians, or just Iberians, as the Israelites living just north of Armenia were also called Iberia, meaning the land of Eber. Our ancestor was Eber or Heber, the ancestor of the Hebrew people. Based on what we now know of these people, we can easily see that Eber is almost identical with Heber, that is with Hebrew, which sounds very close to Iberihu, which is the name of Ireland, the original name of Ireland. The Emerald Isle was also known as Ivernia, Hibernia, Iberian, Erin, Erin, Ireland. So we see that the origin of the Irish people is in fact as the Hebrews. Immediately west of northern Scotland, the Hebrews probably gave their name to the islands called the Hebrides. In northeast Spain, the Ebro River was most likely named after them. And also we have Guadalquivir, which means the river of the Hebrews, or the river of Gad, more correctly, the river of Gad. And the city of Cadiz, the ancient Hebrew name is Gadesh, meaning men of Gad or people of Gad. And these instances come from the book Israel's Post-Captivity Names by Raymond F. McNair. Now we're going to switch to the Goths, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths. The word Goth derives from the word Gete, or Guta also, as pronounced in Armenia, which we have encountered as a suffix of Massagete. Visigoth means West Goth, and Ostrogoth means East Goth. What is the origin of these Gothic people? Paul Siding begins his history of Scandinavia by saying, the present inhabitants of Denmark as well as of Norway and Sweden are successors of the enormous Gothic tribe formerly dwelling around the Black Sea. Okay, that's where our people originated. Notice that both the Svir and the Goths came from the area of the Black Sea. At the mouth of the Danube on the western shore is the area of Getae or Dacia in Roman times. According to Procopius, who wrote his history in the 5th century, Romans say that the Goths are of the Getic race. So the Goths, the Getae, the Scythians, the Anglo Saxons, and the Germans, folks, are all the same people. The Getae are mentioned in the history of Herodotus. In translation by George Rawlinson, his brother Sir Henry gives this footnote. The identity of the Getae with the Goths of later times is more than a plausible conjecture. It may be regarded as historically certain. That's volume 3, page 84, the 1862 edition. Continuing, Jordanus, the best-known Gothic historian, always speaks of the Getae and Goths as one people. He also calls them Scythae or Scythians or Scythians, as we know them, primarily in history books. We find more evidence in other historical accounts. For example, the Pictish Chronicle declares that the Scythians and Goths had a common origin, and that's from the Races of Ireland and Scotland by W.C. Mackenzie. One more quotation about the Goths. The evidence also indicates that the Getae were the same kind of people as the Dacians. They both spoke the same language according to Strabo. Pliny says that the Getae were called Dacians by the Romans. Duquesne, who collected the Norman Chronicles in the 17th century, has no doubt whatever that the Normans were Dacians and consistently calls them by that name in his preface. Dudo, who wrote the earliest history of the Normans in the 10th century, also had no doubt that they came from Scythia beyond the Danube. He also said they were Dacians. So, ladies and gentlemen, all of these historians place the origin of the European Caucasians in the area north and around the Caucasian Mountains very briefly after the Israelites were taken captive by the Assyrians and made their escape through the Dariel Pass into the steppes of that area, known to historians primarily as Scythia, or Greater Scythia. We're going to cover one more tribe, the Teuts or Teutons, who are primarily identified with the German people today. And this is from the Teutonic tribes and the Great Geta Goths by Johansen Inger in Gothenburg from October 2005. And he says this: at the time of the Teutas or Teutons started to be mentioned in documents and books, Tuesta or Tust saw several settlements abandoned, land grown wild again without any shown signs of resettlements within the nearest areas. After 200 BC, the culture around the Baltic Sea became more or less like each other. This seems to be the case from Bornholm, West Prussia, eastern Pommern to Schlesien, as in other areas in the East Germanic tribes where they had settled. To these tribes belonged the Goths, the Burgunds, the Vandals, and other Germanic tribes. It's during this time, according to some, that the Asa Gudar, the Norse gods, came wandering up to southern Scandinavia. It's been presumed by some that the Asar were some Gothic god statues, believed to be from the Amal's dynasty ancestors among the gods of the Goths, who arrived from the Black Sea region of the Balkan Peninsula and up to the Crimea. Here again, the Teutons, or Deutsch as they're known today, the Deutsch, the Germans, originated from the Black Sea. And we can cite 100 more sources to prove the connection between the European Caucasian people and the related cultures who speak versions of Hebrew and Germanic and Anglo-Saxon, English being part of that heritage, that all of our linguistic heritage and our cultural heritage, even these pagan peoples who brought their pagan gods with them because they fraternized with the Canaanites. And this is precisely why Yahweh expelled them, because they refused to stop fraternizing with the Canaanites. And he wanted them to be the bearers of his law. And since they were at that time refusing to bear his law and obey his law, that he expelled them. And as we quoted from the book of Maccabees, they made a pact to go north of Assyria into a land where no human beings had ever dwelt, and there they would begin practicing God's law, as they had never done in the past, because they were such a rebellious people. So, now one more item. The fact is that our ancestors, just like the pioneers in the days of America's pioneer history, these people dwelt in covered wagons. The Scythians were a nomadic people who raised horses, cattle, and sheep. According to ancient Greek historians, Scythians traveled in tent-covered wagons, spoke a form of Persian, which is where our people picked up the Germanic sound of the language. So German is actually a combination of Hebrew and Persian, and it's been shown that the German language has numerous Hebrew root words. We covered the English connection a bit earlier, but German also has many Hebrew words in it, but it even retains Hebrew syntax in many places. The Scythians traveled in tent-covered wagons, spoke a form of Persian, and fought with short bows and arrows from horseback. Their empire stretched north from the Black Sea to parts of present-day Ukraine, Russia, and Moldova from the 7th century BC to the 4th century BC. Again, this is from the Encarta Yearbook, October 1996. Again, placing the beginning of this migration precisely at the time when the Israelites were cast out of Palestine by Yahweh himself. So I think this